Hi, welcome back. In this video, we're going to add our first enemy into our game. Now, there's a bunch of different ways you can approach this. We're going to do 3 different enemies in this class. Each one has a different set of how it moves and how it acts. Our first enemy that we're going to focus on today, we're going to create a system so that when our player gets close to the enemy will chase after our player. Now, to do that, we're going to have to build a system. Because our main character, we control how they move, right? We tell it when and where to move to. But for the enemy, we need to create something so that construct tells our enemy when and where to move. Today, we're going to focus just on the movement. Let's start by just adding in our sprite. We're going to right-click anywhere in the empty white space, and you want to click on Insert New Object. And we're going to go down, and we're going to click one time on sprite, just once. If you click once, we have the opportunity to name it before we create it. And I'm going to name this Enemy 1. You can name it something different. Enemy 1's easy to remember though. I'm going to click Insert. And I'm going to click anywhere in the white space, which opens up our animations editor window. What we're going to do is we're going to add in an animation for our enemies, just kind of idle standing there animation. Now, if you haven't created an animation yet, if you haven't exported the sprite yet, you'd want to do that first. But assuming that you've already created the sprite and you've already exported it, then we can go ahead and import it into Construct. So let's start by clicking on the Load Images from Files button. Now, I already have my sprites here ready. I'm going to do the one just for idle. My enemy is going to be Beetle. It's called Beetle1, idle. And there it is. Now, your idle animation might just be a single picture, right? But mine is an animation. I added a couple frames just to make it look like it's kind of breathing while it's standing there. You don't have to do that, but that's always an option. Now, if yours is an animation, we can change the speed of it. You can set it to loop, which are things that you might want to do. Like, for example, for this animation, I want it to loop so that it's continually breathing over and over again. And if you want it to breathe slower or faster, I can always change that. Maybe I'll turn that number up a little bit. Preview it. Looks pretty good. Now, the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to rename this animation. It's a good habit to always name your animations things that you'll remember. It makes it a lot easier when we get into the event sheet. So I'm going to call this Idle. Good. Let's close that. And there it is. There's our enemy. Now, in order to make this enemy do stuff, we're going to have to add some behaviors to it. Now, if you remember, behaviors are things that allow us to put in different actions in the event sheet for a specific object. We've done some behaviors before, like we added the 8 direction speed for our main character. But now in this case, let's go into our enemy and let's add a couple new behaviors. We're going to start with this one. It's called line of sight. It's a behavior that tests if an object has line of sight to an object or position, if it can see an object. So we can make it so that our enemy can see our main character. We're going to add another new behavior. If I scroll down, this one's called move to, where you can have an object move to a certain position. So we can have our enemy move. Great. Now let's go to our event sheet. We have a couple different groups for all of our character stuff, right? Our character's dashing and movement and attacks and all that stuff. We're going to add a new event now, and this one's going to be for our enemy. We're going to make an event that controls our enemy moving towards our character when they get close enough together. So let's start by finding about halfway down, you'll see a section that says line of sight. And the options are things like has LOS between positions or has LOS to object. What LOS means is line of sight. It's just an abbreviation. So this says has line of sight to object. Click on that. And we can choose what object our enemy is looking for. We want our enemy to look for our main character. I'm going to double click that and I'm going to hit done. So when our enemy can see our main character, then we can add an action. We're going to go to our enemy, and we're going to make our enemy move to our character. If we scroll down towards the bottom, there's a whole section for move to actions. We want to find the one that says move to object. If you double click on that, you're going to choose which object you want to have your enemy move towards, and we want to use our main character. Click OK. Now, some of these other options we're going to come back to and talk about what they mean and how we can change them. But for now, that's all we need. What this event now does is it checks to see if our enemy can see our character. And if our enemy can see our character, it's going to move towards our character. Now let's try that out. It's not going to work great. It's going to kind of work, but our enemy is just floating around and rotating. It is moving towards the character, but it's pretty weird, right? That's actually a quick fix. If we close this, we want to go to our layout, and you want to make sure that you have your enemy clicked on. There should be a blue box around your enemy. And if we look in the left side menu, you'll see an option for set angle under the move to box. What set angle does is it makes Construct guess which way to rotate your sprite depending on which way it's moving. Now, in some cases, that's really helpful, but in what we're doing right now, that's not good at all. It's just making our enemy sprite, flip around. So we can uncheck that box. And if you uncheck set angle, it should work a lot better. Good. It's not spinning around as it moves. Now, it's not perfect yet. There's a lot of weird stuff. Like, number one, it's moving backwards when I'm over to the right. And it also just comes right over, sits right on top of me. There's also no walking animation yet. We'll have to add that in. So we do have some stuff that we have to fix, some things that we have to refine, but it's a good start. Now let's take a minute and talk about what these options are. You have a section for line of sight, and you have a section for move to. And all these things are different parameters that you can change that alter the way that those behaviors work. Like, for example, for line of sight, you have a thing for obstacles. We'll come back and talk about that in just a couple minutes. The only thing that I think is really important for a line of sight right now is the range. The range means how big is the field of vision for your enemy. And by default, it's 10,000 pixels, which is really big. That's basically the whole screen. So you can turn that number down. Maybe you want it so that your enemy can only see right in front of itself, so that it's not always chasing your character, but only if your character gets pretty close. So for example, I could change that number to 500 instead of 10,000. And if I try that out, then my player has to get pretty close in order for the enemy to chase. Now notice that it takes a long time for him to not chase. He basically is always chasing my enemy once I trigger it. We can change that in just a minute. But try messing around with the range. Maybe I'll make it 150. And if it's 150, then I can get really close to it before it starts chasing me. Good. Other things here, I'm going to turn that up a little bit. Other things are cone of view. We can leave that alone. Collision cells, we can leave alone. Max speed under move to is how fast your enemy moves. By default, it's 200. If you want to make your enemy faster or slower, change that number. Acceleration is how quick it takes to get up to full speed. Deceleration is how slow it slows down. If a lower number there will make it kind of drift. Rotate speed, we're not rotating, so we don't even have to worry about that. Set angle we turned off. Stop on solids, we'll come back and talk about that in a second. But as long as you have your max speed set, your range set, that's pretty good. You want to make sure that set angle is unchecked. And those are kind of the most important default settings, I believe. Now here's the thing. Let's go back into our event sheet. And let's make it so that when our main character is out of the line of sight of our enemy stops. Let's add an event. Let's go to our enemy. And we're going to do the same has LOS to object, has line of sight to object. We're going to click on our main character. So this is another event that says when our enemy can see our main character, we can make something happen. Let me show you something we haven't talked about before, and something really useful. If you right click anywhere in this part right here where it says enemy 1 or has line of sight, you'll see the option to invert. What invert means is the opposite of. So you can take any event and make it the opposite. So now what this is saying is when the enemy does not have line of sight to the main character, then you can make something else happen. So for example, if we add an action here, I can go to my enemy and I can say that when the enemy does not have line of sight to our main character, I can go down to move to and I can just make it stop. So he stops moving if you can't see him. Let's try that out. So if I get close to my enemy, it starts chasing. If I get far enough away, it stops chasing me. Great. Now that's one fix. Let's make it turn to face the right direction now. Because right now it's just kind of sliding backwards, and that's not perfect. So let's go back to our event sheet. What we're going to do is use something we haven't done before. We're going to check to see the position of the objects in the screen, and we're going to make our enemy flip based on where its position is. I'm going to start by adding a new event. I'm going to go to my enemy, and I want to scroll down towards the bottom to find where it says compare X. Now what X means, X is where something is on the screen from left to right. And you can actually check, like if I go to my layout, do you see this number down here on the bottom left? I'm sorry, the bottom right? That left number is the X number. So for example, right now, my main character is at X284. You'll see that number down here. And as it moves across the screen, the X number gets bigger and bigger. So the X is just where your character or your enemy is from left to right. So if I go in here and I add an event for my enemy where I compare its X, we're going to set the comparison to less than. And what I'm going to type in here, and this is a little tricky, I'm going to type in the name of my main character. So whatever your main character's name is, and you can find that over here if you don't remember it. Mine's called main character, which is easy to remember. I'm going to type in that name, followed by a period, and then the letter X. What this means is that if our enemy's X coordinate is less than our main character's X coordinate, then we can have something happen. What I'm going to have happen in this action is I'm going to take my enemy and I'm going to mirror it. Click on next, set to mirrored. That way my enemy flips if my enemy is further to the left than my main character. We want to do the same thing for the opposite too. I'm going to add a new event, go to my enemy, compare the X, and this time I'm going to do greater than. And again, name of your main character, which you can find over here, a period, and the letter X. It's the same thing except for greater than rather than less than. And now I'm going to add an action to my enemy, and this time I'm going to do mirrored, not mirrored. Let's try it out. It's coming for me. If I run the other direction, flips to face the right direction. Perfect. Now, if yours is backwards, you just have to change these. It just depends on which direction you had your character facing when you drew it. So if yours is moving backwards, just change this one to not mirrored and change this one to mirrored, and that should work. You can see it's the opposite way now. Great. Now let's see. What else should we do? I guess we can set it up so that they don't overlap on top of each other, right? That'd probably be a good thing. We want our enemy to stop right when it gets to like the edge next to our character. And to do that, we're going to go to our layout and we're going to click on our enemy sprite just once. And if you scroll down on the left panel, under the Move To section, you see where it says Stop on Solids? And a description of that pops up at the bottom. It says automatically stop movement if hitting a solid object. We want to check that box. That way, when our enemy runs into something solid, whether it's like a wall or an obstacle or our main character, it'll stop moving. Now, the next thing we have to do for that is we have to say that our main character is solid. Right now, our main character is not actually a solid object because we never said it was. So what we have to do is we have to click on it once. We're going to go to behaviors and we're going to add a new behavior for our main character. And you'll notice right up at the top, solid. What this does is it makes our main character a solid object, which is great. We need to do that anyway, right? Because we want to make sure our character can't walk through walls and stuff anyway. So now our character is solid. And now our enemy will walk up to him and stop. He won't be able to overlap on top. Let's try it. Good. Now you can actually move your character through them though. We'll talk about that in the future. We're going to set up the whole system for our main character's hit points and damage and everything in a future video. So for now, that's pretty good. Now there is one thing I want to mention. No matter how far away I go, the enemy just keeps chasing me now, even if I'm outside of the field of vision. I don't know why this happens, but it's a pretty easy fix. If you click on your enemy, see where it says line of sight? Now that we've made our main character solid, we have to change the obstacles from solid to custom. And I wish I could explain why this is true, but I really don't know. You just have to make sure that the obstacle says custom. And when you do that, the line of sight will work. If you don't do it, the line of sight just doesn't really work right. So if you've made your main character solid, change the obstacles to custom. Perfect. Notice how our enemy is kind of up high compared to my player character, right? My goblin's feet are down here, but the beetle's feet are way up here. We can change that with image points. If you go over to the event sheet, up in our top event where it says enemy has line of sight, blah, 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 enemy move to main character, notice how it gives you the option to put in an image point for it to aim towards. We're going to make a new image point. By default, it's set to 0, and 0 is just the origin point of your character, and you don't want to mess with that. So we're going to make a new one. So let's double click on our player. Let's click on this tool right here. It looks like little crosshairs on the left side. And we're going to add a new image point in. So right click over here on the empty space and click add new image point. Now, if I double click here, I can change the name of this image point. And I recommend naming it something like, name it something like enemy, because this is where the enemies are going to be aiming towards. And you can put that image point anywhere you want. Since my enemy was aiming a little bit high, I'm going to move it down a little bit further, maybe down to like where his belly button is. And I'm going to right click here and I'm going to apply that to all the animations. If you don't apply it to all the animations, you have to go in by hand and set it to the right spot, and that's very annoying. So click apply to all animations, and then it'll be there no matter what animation is playing. So I set a new image point. If I go back to the event sheet, I can now tell the bug, the beetle, the enemy, to move towards that specific image point. If you type in the name of it, you have to put in quotation marks. So if I do quotation mark enemy, quotation mark, it'll work. If you just type in the name enemy without it, it doesn't work. So quotation marks and click done. Now let's press play. Let's see if it works. Good. That's maybe even a little bit too low. So I might go in there and adjust it. Go to my enemy point, move it up a little bit. Again, right click, apply to all animations. Yeah, that's great. All right. Before we wrap it up, let's add a little bit of animation. Right now, our enemy is always in the same idle animation, right? And what we want to do is we want to make it so that when the enemy is moving, it's playing its movement animation, and when it's standing still, it's playing its idle animation. To add the animation, we have to double click on our enemy to open up the animations editor. What we're going to do is we're going to right click in the window on the top right, and we're going to add an animation. I recommend naming this animation something that you'll recognize. I'm going to call mine walk. This is going to be the enemy's walking animation. Now, if you haven't exported the walking animation for your character yet, you want to do that first. But if you have, then you can go over to the Load Images from Files button, find your walking animation, and there it is. You can always adjust the speed if you want to make it faster or slower. Let's take a look at it. Here's mine. I might go a little bit faster. Oh, that's too fast. Let's try 12. That's pretty good. Notice how it only does it once and then stops. I want to make sure it's looping. If I click on loop, yeah, that's pretty good. Maybe I'll turn down that speed a little. Great. So it's called walk, loops, speed is correct. Excellent. Now, all we have to do is go to our event sheet. We're going to have to tell the enemy that when it's moving, it should be animating and walk. And when it's not moving, the animation should be idle. So let's add an event. Let's go to our enemy. And if you scroll down towards the bottom, right here, you'll see is moving. This is part of the move to section because of the move to behavior. What is moving does is it checks to see if your enemy is moving or not. And if it is moving, we can add an action for the enemy to set the animation to walk. Great. And when it's not moving, we want to set the animation to idle, right? So let's go to add event, enemy 1 is moving, but just like with this line of sight, we can make it the opposite, right? If I right click on this, I can click on invert, which means that enemy 1 is not moving. I can add an action to enemy 1, set animation, idle. Let's try that out. Standing animation, perfect. Get close to it. Oh, walking animation, get far enough away, standing animation. Perfect. All right, that's great. We've done a lot today. I think we can probably leave it there. In the next video, we can talk about how to make our player attack the enemy. So we'll save that for next time. Thanks, guys.